Two words lit up cable news this week: abject surrender. That's how one of MSNBC's biggest morning hosts described President Trump's newly signed agreement with Iran. And the number behind that claim is enormous: $300 billion. The White House didn't stay quiet. The president fired back, calling parts of the story fake news. The vice president went on air to clarify the administration's position. And within 48 hours, this had turned into one of the messiest, most confusing stories of the week, with officials from the same administration appearing to describe the exact same fund in different ways. So what did the host actually say? What does the deal itself actually say in writing? Why did the vice president's own explanation shift between interviews? And why does this whole fight echo something Trump himself said a decade ago about a very similar number? This video is going to walk through the full timeline, the actual text of the agreement, the historical irony nobody's talking about, and what the real, defensible answer is here. Not the shouting match version. Let's get into it. The claim that started it. Let's start at the beginning, with exactly what was said and by whom. On his MSNBC morning program, host Joe Scarborough delivered a blistering critique of the new Memorandum of Understanding the Trump administration signed with Iran. Paraphrasing his core argument, Scarborough described the deal as an abject surrender, one that, in his view, would leave Tehran more powerful than it's ever been. His reasoning centered heavily on that $300 billion figure. He argued Iranian officials were already treating the agreement as a victory rather than a concession, pointing to what he characterized as celebratory reactions tied to the proposed reconstruction fund. He also accused the administration of leaning on bravado and viral imagery instead of substantive policy, suggesting that dramatic footage and online messaging were standing in for an actual coherent, explainable strategy. And he raised a sharper contrast too. Trump, he noted, had recently defended Iran's right to retain its ballistic missiles, which Scarborough juxtaposed directly against earlier statements from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who had claimed Iran's missile stockpiles had already been destroyed during the prior conflict. That juxtaposition is worth pausing on for a second, separate from the money question. If Hegseth said the missiles were destroyed, but Trump is now defending Iran's right to retain missiles, those two statements are at minimum in tension with each other, and a host pointing that out isn't an unreasonable thing to flag. So Scarborough's commentary wasn't just about a dollar figure. It was a broader argument that the administration's messaging on Iran wasn't internally consistent, and that the financial terms made the deal look more favorable to Tehran than the administration was publicly admitting. That's a strong claim, wrapped in a strong number, attached to a sharper consistency argument underneath it. So naturally, it didn't take long for the White House to respond. Trump and Vance fire back. President Trump didn't wait long to respond. Asked directly by a reporter about the $300 billion figure, his answer was blunt. Quote, paraphrased, "It's false, false." He added that the United States would not be contributing money toward any such fund. He repeated that denial on Truth Social, writing paraphrased, that reports claiming the U.S. is paying Iran $300 billion are fake news, pushed by Democrats. In that same post, he reiterated that Iran had agreed to never possess a nuclear weapon, tying the financial denial to what he framed as the deal's central achievement. A few days later, speaking to reporters at the G7 summit in France, Trump expanded on the denial. Sitting next to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, he said, quote, paraphrased, "We're not investing. We're not putting up 10 cents. He added that people are free to decide to invest in Iran on their own, but that the U.S. government itself does not have a fund and is not pushing Gulf countries to create one. He also said any reporting suggesting otherwise was, quote, a false story that got picked up incorrectly from a statement that was pretty well made. That last line is worth noting, because it's Trump himself acknowledging that an actual official statement existed. He's just disputing how it was interpreted afterward, not denying that a statement was made in the first place. Vice President J.D. Vance backed the administration's overall framing in a separate interview, telling CBS News that the United States, quote, isn't giving up a cent of money to Iran. He explained that any future economic benefit to Iran would depend entirely on Tehran fulfilling its obligations under the agreement, and that Gulf nations, not the U.S. government, would likely finance the bulk of any reconstruction effort. So at first glance, this looks like a clean story. A host made an explosive claim. The administration called it false. End of story. Except it's not that simple. Because earlier in the same week, before Trump's denial, a separate senior U.S. official speaking to reporters on background had described the fund in a noticeably different way. And Vance himself, in an earlier interview, used language that sounded a lot more like confirmation than denial. The official who said something different. Before Trump's denial went public, a senior U.S. official told reporters directly, quote, paraphrased, "We discussed the possibility of releasing frozen funds, sanctions relief, a big $300 billion fund to rebuild their country, and all of these things are going to be tied to performance." Read that again. That's an administration official, on the record with reporters, describing a $300 billion fund as something that had been discussed and was tied to Iranian performance under the deal, not dismissing it as a rumor. That same morning, Vice President Vance appeared on CBS News and was asked directly about the potential $300 billion fund. His answer at the time was, quote, "That's the sort of thing they could have access to, funded by the Gulf Coast Coalition, so long as they honor their end of the obligation." Notice what that sentence is doing. Vance isn't denying the fund exists. He's confirming Iran could have access to it, while specifying the funding source as a Gulf coalition rather than direct American cash. It was only after that interview, and after the story spread rapidly online, that Trump posted his denial, calling the $300 billion story fake news, and Vance, in subsequent comments, sharpened his language to emphasize that not a single cent would come from the United States itself. That's not necessarily a contradiction. It's possible to both confirm a fund exists and deny that your own government is the one paying for it. Those are two different claims. But the sequence matters for understanding why this got so confusing. The fund was confirmed first, in plain terms, by two separate officials before the denial campaign kicked in. Once the political backlash started, what does the deal actually say? This is the part of the story that actually matters most. And it's the part that's gotten the least attention, because headlines move faster than 14-point legal frameworks. According to the Memorandum of Understanding itself, read aloud publicly by U.S. officials, the agreement includes language committing the United States to work with, quote, paraphrased, regional partners to develop a definitive, mutually agreed plan worth at least $300 billion for the reconstruction and economic development of Iran, with the specific mechanism to be finalized within 60 days, and any required U.S. financial licenses, waivers, or permissions to be granted by the United States as part of implementing that plan. That's not a rumor. That's not a leak from an anonymous source. That's language read directly from the signed agreement by administration officials, on the record. Separately, Reuters reported, citing a source familiar with the matter, that the $300 billion is structured as a private investment vehicle, meaning private capital, not government reconstruction payments or reparations, flowing primarily through Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. So how does that square with Trump calling the $300 billion story fake news? Here's the nuance, laid out as cleanly as we can manage. When Trump says the U.S. isn't paying Iran $300 billion, that's accurate. In a specific, narrow sense, direct American government cash isn't funding it. And U.S. taxpayers aren't writing Iran a check. But when Scarborough and multiple major news outlets, including the New York Times, NPR, BBC, and CNN, report that a $300 billion fund tied to this deal exists, and that Iran could gain meaningful access to it, that's also accurate. The fund is written into the agreement. Senior officials confirmed it on the record multiple times before the political pushback began. Put as plainly as possible, Trump is technically correct that the U.S. government isn't writing Iran a direct check. Scarborough is also correct that a massive fund tied to this deal exists in writing, and that Tehran could benefit enormously from it. Both things are true simultaneously, which is exactly why this story spiraled into confusion so quickly. It's not really a story about one side lying. It's a story about two different, narrower claims getting flattened into one big argument. The historical irony nobody's talking about. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, regardless of which side of this you land on politically. Back in 2015, during a Republican presidential primary debate, then-candidate Trump tore into the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran, formerly known as the JCPOA, for giving Tehran access to roughly $150 billion in previously frozen assets. He called it, quote, paraphrased, a horrible, disgusting, incompetent deal that handed a terrorist nation a massive windfall. A month later, he doubled down, saying he didn't understand how the U.S. could agree to give, quote, paraphrased, a terror nation $150 billion. Now, a decade later, his own administration is negotiating and has signed a framework that could give Iran access to a fund twice that size. $300 billion instead of $150 billion. To be fair and accurate, the financing structure is genuinely different between the two deals. The 2015 figure involved unfreezing assets that were already Iran's own money, locked up by sanctions, not new money being created or transferred. The 2026 figure is a newly constructed reconstruction fund, financed largely by Gulf states rather than unlocked Iranian assets. Those are not identical financial mechanisms, and that distinction is real and matters if you're being precise. But the optics are difficult to ignore, and a CNN analysis published this week made exactly that point directly. The same number, doubled, under the same president who once built a significant part of his political brand, attacking it as outrageous and dangerous. That contrast doesn't prove either side's framing is dishonest, but it does complicate any attempt to tell this story as a simple, one-sided narrative for supporters and critics alike. If $150 billion was a windfall for a terrorist state in 2015, the same logic invites obvious questions about $300 billion in 2026. Even with a different financing structure attached, why this matters beyond one cable news segment. It's worth stepping back and asking why a single morning show segment turned into a multi-day, multi-statement political fight involving the president, the vice president, and outlets across the political spectrum. Part of the answer is simply the scale of the number. $300 billion is large enough that almost any framing of it sounds dramatic, whether you're emphasizing that it's not direct U.S. cash, or emphasizing that it exists at all, and benefits a government the U.S. has had hostile relations with for decades. Part of the answer is also about precedent and trust. Given Trump's own history attacking the 2015 deal specifically over dollar figures tied to Iran, any large number associated with his own administration's Iran policy was always going to draw heightened scrutiny from critics looking for inconsistency, and from supporters looking to defend the deal's framing. And part of the answer is structural. Diplomatic agreements like this one are often summarized in a single number for headlines, when the actual mechanism, financing structure, conditionality, implementation timeline is buried several paragraphs into the actual text. That gap between headline number and underlying mechanism is exactly where confusion and convenient political spin tend to live. None of this means the underlying questions don't matter. Whether Iran ultimately gains substantial economic benefit from this deal, and under what conditions, is a legitimate and significant policy question, regardless of who's delivering taxpayer money and who isn't. Scarborough's broader critique, stripped of the most charged language, is essentially, is this deal good for the United States, or does it primarily benefit Iran? That's a real debate, and it deserves to be argued on the merits, rather than reduced to a fact check about whether a specific phrase was technically false. The close. Who's actually right here? So, after all of that, who's actually right in this fight, Trump, or the MSNBC host who set it off? Based on the actual record, laid end to end, the honest answer is, both of them are describing something real, just from different angles. And a chunk of this fight is really about which angle you choose to emphasize. Scarborough's underlying factual claim that a $300 billion fund tied to Iran's benefit exists inside this agreement is accurate and documented, confirmed by multiple officials and read directly from the signed text. Calling it an abject surrender is his opinion, his editorial judgment, layered on top of that fact, and viewers are free to agree or disagree with that characterization specifically. Trump's denial that American taxpayers are personally cutting Iran a $300 billion check also appears accurate, based on how officials have consistently described the funding mechanism, primarily Gulf-financed, contingent on Iranian compliance, structured as private investment rather than a direct U.S. government transfer. What doesn't hold up well, under scrutiny, is the idea that this is simply fake news invented out of nowhere by critics. The fund is written into the Memorandum of Understanding. Multiple major outlets confirmed it independently, through separate sourcing. Two senior administration officials described it on the record before the denial campaign began. That part isn't speculation, and treating it as invented misinformation doesn't match the documented timeline. The real story here isn't really about who insulted who on cable news, or which side scored better talking points in a given news cycle. It's about how a single complicated financial provision, buried in a 14-point diplomatic framework, can get flattened into two completely different, competing talking points depending entirely on which detail you choose to emphasize and which detail you choose to leave out. That's worth remembering the next time a headline hands you a big number with no context attached. The number itself might be completely real, The fight almost always happens over the framing wrapped around it, not the number. We'll be watching closely as that $300 billion mechanism gets finalized over the next 60 days, exactly as required under the agreement's own terms. And we'll bring you the update the moment there's something concrete to report, rather than another round of competing talking points.